Yashodanandana Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Oops, not canto. It's my last class. Today we will hear from Srimad Bhagavatam. Today we'll hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 16, Text 10. Ye, me, tunur, dvijavaran, duhatir, madiya, ye me tanur dvijavaran duhatir madiya. Bhutani, alabdha, sharanani, cha, heda buddhya. You would not believe how loud that is with my hearing aids. Where were we? Bhutan. I'm sorry. Bhutanya labdha sharanani chapeda buddhya. Drakshyanti. Aghakshatta drisho. Hi. Ahimanyavas. Tan. Drakshantyaghakshata drisho hya ahi. Okay. Caught grandpa this time. Drakshantyaghakshata drisho hya hi manyavastan. Should we take another swing at that one?
Yes.
Me too, huh? Drakshantyaghakshata drisho hya hi manyavastan. Gridha, Risha, Mama, Kushanti, Abhidandanetu, Gridha, Risha, Mama, Kushanti, Abhidandanetu. Ye me tanur dvijavaran duhatir madiya. Bhutanya labdha sharanani chapeda buddhya. Drakshantyaghakshata drisho hya hi manyavastan. Vridha rusha mama kushantya adhidandanetu. Ye me tanur dvijavaran duhatir madiya. Bhutanya labdha sharanani chapeda buddhya. Drakshantyaghakshata drisho hya hi manyavastan. Gridha rusha mama kushantya dhidandanetu. Others, please. Synonyms. Yea, which persons, may, my, tanu, body, Dvijavaran, the best of the Brahmanas. Pause. Dvijavaran, the vara, that's connected with something that we talk about sometimes when I give class. The three aspects of sadhu sangha, sajatiya shaye snigte, and svato vare. So this vara is the same vara, better or best, right? So the best of the Brahmins. Okay. Press that pause button again, Lily. There you go. Now we're ready to roll again. Duhati, cows. Madhya, relating to me. Bhutani, living entities. Alapta sharanani, defenseless. Cha, and Peda buddhya, considering as different. Drakshanti, see. Agha, by sin. Kshata, is impaired. Drashaha, whose faculty of judgment. He, because. Ahi, like a snake. Manyava, angry. Tan, those same persons. Gridra, the vulture-like messengers. Rusha, angrily. Mama, my. Kushanti, tear. Adhidandanetu, the superintendent of punishment, Yamaraj. Translation and report by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. They are just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of all sinful persons. Responsibly, please. The brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures, are my own body. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin. Look upon these as distinct from me. They're just like furious serpents. And they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj. The superintendent of sinful persons. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The defenseless creatures, according to Brahma Samhita, are the cows, brahmanas, women, children, and old men. Of these five, the brahmanas and the cows are especially mentioned in this verse because the Lord is always anxious about the benefit of the brahmanas and the cows, and is prayed to in this way. What way? Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmanitaya Cha. Very fond of cows and brahmanas. The Lord especially instructs, therefore, that no one should be envious of these five, especially the cows and brahmanas. In some of the Bhagavatam readings, the word duhitri is used instead of duhati. But in either case, the meaning is the same. Duhati means cow, and duhitri means can also be used to mean cow, because the cow is supposed to be the daughter of the sun god. Just as children are taken care of by the parents, women as a class should be taken care of by the father, husband, or a grown-up son. Those who are helpless must be taken care of by their respective guardians. Otherwise, the guardians will be subjected to the punishment of Yamaraj, who is appointed by the Lord to supervise the activities of sinful living creatures. The assailants or messengers of Yamaraj are likened here to vultures, and those who do not execute their respective duties in protecting their wards are compared to serpents. Vultures deal very seriously with serpents, and similarly, the messengers will deal very seriously with neglectful guardians. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Mukhaṁ karoti vāchalam bhangum langhayate girim jakrapatamaham mande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindhobhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Ye me tanur dvijavarandu patir madiya bhutanya lapta sharanani cha bheda bhutya drakshantya ghachakcha kshatta dushohya yahi manyavastha. The brahmanas, the cows, and the defenseless creatures are my own body. To those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin, look upon these as distinct from me. They're just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. I mean, who's heard of the Yamaduta's duties being like this? Usually we think of them showing up in chains and sternly escorting the errant soul to the court of Yamaraj to hear the account of all their sins and then suffer punishment. But this is a special kind of problem. The Lord has very elaborately explained the identity between himself and those connected with him, especially his own servants and the brahmanas. So who's he addressing here again? For Maharaj. So he's addressing these sages, and he's telling them, you guys are so dear to me. You're so dear to me that if it came to it, I'd cut off my own arm. Of course, as I was observing yesterday, he has 3 others. Oh, and then he can just grow a 4th one again. No problem. And that, of course, calls to mind those of us who heard this story. And I remember years ago, I heard this story, and I had heard it before, and at one point after hearing the story, I wrote to Malati and asked her, this is how I heard this story. Is this how it happened? And she said, yes. So that evokes the story where Srila Prabhupada was being visited by one of his godbrothers, and his godbrothers they had funny feelings about the Western disciples, and especially Prabhupada being attended by young woman disciples. So he was feeling this from this godbrother who had come to visit him and honor prasadam with him, lunch prasadam with him. And he called Malati out. He said, you see this girl? Yes, she cooks for me. But I'll tell you this, she would cut her throat for me, and I would cut mine for her. So this is the identity we feel with those close to us, those dear to us. We would take a bullet for our family members. We would take a bullet for our dear friends. I thought about this. Okay, I would take a bullet for somebody, but would I cut my throat? There are some people I probably would if it came to it. It just sounds really hard to do, and seems like it would hurt a lot for a moment. Really hurt a lot for a moment, because there's a lot of nerves there. But yes, if it came to it, and this is the Lord's mentality. And he's just said, he's pointing at his, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says in his commentary on the last verse, he's pointing at his crown, pointing at his head, and he said, I, whose footwater purifies all the worlds, and Lord Shiva, have become the wealth of unrestricted power by the mercy of holding the dust of the brahmanas on my head. And the other day the question arose, even the brahmanas who are like Karmakanda brahmanas? We'll find out tomorrow. The answer to that question is in tomorrow's verse. I wanted to take that verse, but then I thought, no, I'm giving 2 classes in 2 hours. That sometimes breaks me, as we saw last week. And so I thought, I'll let Rajesh. He'll do so much better with it anyway. So, yes. Even those who speak harshly, this is how closely the Lord identifies with them. He says, so as Srila Prabhupada ends his purport yesterday, he says, the Lord says that although he's the predominating factor of the internal energy, And although the material world is sanctified by the water that has washed his feet, he has the greatest respect for the Brahmana and the Vaishnava. When the Lord himself offers so much respect to the Vaishnava and the Brahmana, how can anyone deny such respect to such personalities? Even those Brahmanas and Vaishnavas who sometimes speak harshly, they're very, very dear to the Lord. Just like we see yesterday evening, we discussed one of the verses from the second canto, the Vyavasayatmika Bhutire Keda Kuru Nandana verse. And in that verse, Srila Prabhupada that's a very powerful verse about how we have one-pointed attention on serving the Lord, then we're able to accomplish great things. Whereas those who don't have that kind of focus, their attention is splayed, is many-branched, bahushaka. So Prabhupada liked this verse very much, and he particularly liked Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary on the verse. Prabhupada elsewhere cites that commentary as saying that that the way we get that one-pointed focus, that laser-like focus on service to the Lord, is by satisfying the spiritual master. He says Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur has written in this respect. So, that's such a thing. What Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur says is that when we wholeheartedly accept the particular practice, the particular sadhana given to us by our spiritual master, then we can attain this laser-like focus on the service to the Lord. But in his purport to that verse, Srila Prabhupada cites the 8th text to Vishwanath's Gurvashtakam, Yasya Prasadat Bhagavat Prasado. And it was funny. We realized, okay, sometimes we don't know if we can actually just sit down and read this verse. We see these words, and the only way we can say them is to sing them. So we all sang them together. It's really sweet. Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasado, yasya aprasadam nagati kutopi. Right? Only by the grace of the spiritual master can we actually make spiritual progress. And without the grace of the spiritual master, yasya aprasadam nagati kutopi, we can't make any kind of progress. We get nowhere at all. And in the previous verse, in the 7th verse, sakshadhari tvena samasta shastraya ruktastata bhavyate eva shadvi. All the scriptures celebrate the Guru as being as good as the spiritual master. We see verses to that effect in the Bhagavatam. That the spiritual master should be seen as the Lord and as our own, as dear to us as our very self. But, he says, kintu, however, kintu, sometimes I think of tu as but and kintu as however. The adjectival, what is it? Anyway, I used to know this stuff. I used to teach this stuff. So anyway, however, kintu prabhorya priya eva tasya. However, he's even more than that because he's very dear to the Lord. Right? Just like Lord Shiva tells Parvati when she asks, what's the highest form of worship? He says, Aradhananam sarvesham Vishnu Aradhanam param. Okay. The highest form of worship is worship of the Lord, of Lord Vishnu. Vishnu Aradhanam param. It's above all the others. And she's thinking, I'm worshiping him. This is my pati, this is my husband, this is my Lord. But then he says, Tasmat parataram devi tadyanam samarchana. But even higher than that, my dear goddess, is worship of those things that are connected to Krishna. Because Lord Shiva is so dear to Lord Vishnu. So Prabhupada explains Tadiya Seva. Tadiya Seva means service to those things connected to Krishna. Krishna's devotee, Krishna's tulsi, Krishna's dham, Krishna's temple. We see the devotees keeping the temple clean, working hard to keep the temple clean each day. So these things are Tadiya Seva, and this is even better. We think, the Pujari, such a lucky duck. They get to get up on the altar and be right there with the Lord. I get to mow the lawn. I get to mow the lawn. How cool is that? I get to wash the rags from the kitchen if I can find the washer free. That's cool. So Tadhyana. So the Lord identifies so closely with these things that are connected with Him. And what could be more connected with Him, more closely connected with Him than the Brahmanas, the Vaishnavas, and the cows? The Brahmajanatiti Brahmana. This is the definition of a Brahmana, someone who knows Brahman. But even better than the Brahmana is the Vaishnava, because they know Vishnu, right? And the cows are so dear to Krishna. Here's Lord Narayan saying, the cows are really dear to me, because you know what? When I get a chance to get rid of all these fancy duds, this snazzy crown that's hiding all this dust from the feet of the Vaishnavas, and these fancy shoes, and I'm going to run around barefoot in the Brajaraj. Krishna brought up yesterday the Braja. We saw this foot dust, this Raja. There's Raja and there's Raja. This is Raja, the dust from the feet of the Vaishnavas. So I'm going to run around in the Brajaraja, where there are cow patties, chasing cows, chasing my friends, being chased by my friends, being wrestled to the ground by some of my friends. That's what I do when I'm not at the office. Vrindavan, Braja Mandala. That's the Godhead at home. That's the Godhead with his shoes, with his shoes off. And Mother Yashoda, when Krishna goes out to herd the cows in the morning, you should wear shoes. I'll wear shoes when the cows wear shoes. If it's good enough for the cows, it's good enough for me. The Brajaraj is good enough for the cows, it's good enough for me. So the cows are so dear to Krishna. Anyone who's defenseless, anyone who needs shelter is so dear to Krishna. So who else is dear to Krishna? The Brahmanas, the women, children, and old men. So many times Prabhupada talked about this. The need for society to provide shelter for those who require shelter. So women need some shelter. Old people need some shelter. Cows need some shelter. Children certainly need shelter. They do not need to be exploited in any way. So this is a human society. Without this, we just don't have real civilization. It's just animal society. Worse, animals, they take care of their young. The lioness, she's very protective of her cubs. Oh, lioness just reminds me. Got on Facebook for a moment, and who came up in my news feed but Achyuta Gopi. Anybody who knows Achyuta Gopi knows Achyuta Gopi with that long mane of beautiful braids. Pow, already. She shaved her head.
Oh, really?
Yep. She says a lioness does not need a mane. She shaved her head and donated it to a Balaji. Donated her hair to a Balaji temple, apparently. So the lioness protects her cubs. What's our image in the West, especially of the protected mother? Mama bear, right? Don't poke Mama bear. Don't mess with the cubs. Mama bear, teeth bared, claws out, you're toast. So these things are so dear to these are so dear to Krishna, as I've mentioned before. Because one woman, no, there are other factors as well. We know these other factors. Shri Shri Panchatattvaki Jai. Snooze, you lose. Where was I?
You snooze, you lose.
Before that. Rewind just a moment.
Maine, the mother.
She shaved her hair.
Oh, so yeah. So anyway, all these different personalities, all these different kinds of personalities require some shelter. And Lord Narayan here has a very harsh picture of those who don't respect the cows, the Brahmanas, and the Vaishnavas especially. But Srila Prabhupada, I was talking about how Prabhupada so often evoked these five kinds of persons who require protection. The Brahmanas, the cows, old people, women, and children. And I remember once we were living, I remember listening to this tape at our home in Honolulu on a big island. And I remember hearing Srila Prabhupada in Berkeley talking about this. And there was a child crying in the temple room. And someone, or maybe I shouldn't even guess at who it was, probably the temple president, said, the children should be removed. And Prabhupada stopped him. And he said, no, the children should not be punished. Now, as I remember it, the child crying, or Bhagawatam. And I think it was the temple president. The children should be removed. And Prabhupada said, no, the children and women should not be punished. They get to stay. And I remember hearing about that. I think I might have discussed it, mentioned it to Kusha sometime later or something. Because that was before, you lived in Berkeley before you lived on Waipunalei Road, right?
Berkeley, no, San Francisco.
San Francisco. That's right. It was San Francisco Temple. It wasn't the Berkeley Temple. Yeah. So, she said, it was probably out in around. It was probably us. So, Srila Prabhupada was so adamant about this. This is human society. This is a civilized society that provides shelter to those who need shelter. Doesn't kick them to the curb. Doesn't leave them on their own. So, this is a really, really nice verse. And then he says, and those who don't, they'll be ripped to shreds. They'll be, figuratively at least, ripped to shreds by the messengers of Yamaraj. In other words, to neglect those who require shelter. Very simple. Very, very simple. Now we'll hear the other side of this in tomorrow's verse. But I'll stop now and entertain any discussion or questions, reflections, or whatever. Is that a hand? That's a hand. Atmarama Dasa. Ananta Dasa.
I hear that they shave all the meat off the longest bones and feed it to the vultures.
I'm sorry?
I hear that that's part of the Tibetan way to feed the meat off the bones to the vultures, and then burn then they cremate the bones, and then wherever the pearls are pointed, that's where they find the longest.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
And the golden eagle is a vulture.
So we see, we have this image, yes, we see that on the Mexican national flag, right? We see the snake, we see the rattlesnake being dealt with rather seriously, as we see here in this last sentence, by the eagle. Yeah.
Oh, I got to see when we were interviewing Shama Sundar for Srila Prabhupada's book in Topanga Canyon. There was a eagle flying with a snake in his talons.
Wow.
It was so amazing to have that darshan, because you see it on the coins and everything, but it was for real. There it was right in front of us. This eagle carrying the snake, and the snake didn't look that happy.
Maybe he was rescuing the snake from calamity or something.
Maybe. Okay, so the verse one more time. The Brahmanas, the cows, and defenseless creatures are my own body. No separation. Those whose faculty of judgment has been impaired by their own sin look upon these as distinct from me. They are just like furious serpents, and they are angrily torn apart by the bills of the vulture-like messengers of Yamaraj, the superintendent of sinful persons. Grantha Raja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.